Joining me now are a couple of very smart minds in electoral politics from a national perspective. Larry Sabato, director of the University of Virginia's Center for Politics, keeper of the Sabato Crystal Ball, and Dave Wasserman, House editor of the Cook Political Report and an NBC News contributor. Dave, you just heard from Philip Bailey there. It was a very, put it this way, the DNC's not sending around those talking points, are they? They were basically saying, look, everybody, weirdly enough, Republicans are secretly happy about this almost as much as Democrats are. That interesting perspective.
Yeah, and it was really northern Kentucky in those suburbs where we saw the biggest erosion for Matt Bevin versus 2015. We saw Democrats advance further in the suburbs in Virginia. In 2020, there won't be a single state or federal office holder representing Fairfax County, Virginia, and Richmond or Washington. And so, yeah, that suburban advance for Democrats continues on.
Larry Sabato, this feels as if this was an election night that just reinforced pre-existing notions that we all had, and all of the results sort of, oh, yep, so Trump still got suburban problems, yep, still a rural-urban divide, yep, you know, certain thing, oh, Obamacare can play in every corner in this country. It feels as if everything reinforced what we already knew, or at least we think.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. We didn't have to learn any new lessons, at least not here in Virginia. So I'm happy about that. But not yet. But what you just said is true. This is a 25-year process, changing demographics that, frankly, have been put on steroids by Donald Trump. The election of Donald Trump. This has pushed so many suburbanites and exurbanites who had voted Republican, Chuck, for decades into the Democratic Party. They now show up, vote Democratic regularly. And remember, this is the culmination. This was the last piece of the puzzle that Democrats didn't control. Now they have everything in Virginia. There's nothing left. There are no more worlds to conquer. If I were the Republicans, I wouldn't spend 10 cents in Virginia, at least until Donald Trump is gone.
I was just going to say, Trump, in this case in Virginia, Larry, felt it, as you just put it right, he accelerated a trend. So, I mean, at this point, there is no alternative Republican Party left?
There's nothing. It's really amazing. The Republicans used to win because they nominated center-right people who were acceptable to the suburbanites and actually were well liked by the suburbanites. Now it's the hardcore, harsh Republicans who tend to win statewide nominations and a lot of local nominations. And it just doesn't sell, and they don't even seem to care.
Let's talk about the impact in 2020 a bit here, Dave. What's amazing to me is actually how not only was this result reinforcing, it was almost identical to what we saw in 2018. A Democrat who fit the district or the state, Andy Beshear, runs on protecting something that is growing more popular by the day, Obamacare, and somehow is able to win in some red areas. And oh, by the way, is he a millennial technically? I think he may have even checked that box, right? There is a pattern here. What is the lesson Democrats should take away from this?
Well, a couple of things from last night. First of all, this suburban pipeline away from Republicans in the Democratic Party that Larry's talking about, it's absolutely affecting presidential politics because there's a new name for those suburban Republicans who don't like Trump, and it's called Democrats. And by the way, in Virginia, even if you're not Virginia doesn't have party registration, so you can vote in whoever's primary for president. Those voters are not Warrencrats. They're not Bernie-crats. I think they're a moderating influence on the Democratic presidential electorate in Virginia and around the country, which is good news for someone like Joe Biden. But also, the result out of Mississippi, we should talk about that, too.
Okay.
Because that was not as sparkling a result for Democrats. African Americans there did not turn out at the levels that Jim Hood and Democrats were hoping. And I think that is a caveat to last night's results, a warning sign for Democrats in Louisiana's runoff a couple weeks from now, but also in 5 of the 6 states that are going to decide the presidential election in 2020.
African-American vote is big.
The African-American vote. North Carolina, Florida, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin.
Larry, what's your, particularly on health care, look, it looks to me as if the Democrats could play the keep, protect, expand Obamacare hand, and they can play in any state, in any district, in any county in the country.
That's exactly right. Look, Medicare for All plays in deeply blue states and districts, and that's terrific, but you have to win some of the states you've just mentioned and Dave has been talking about. If you can't win those, you're not going to win the presidency. And Obamacare is, for the first time, truly, really popular. It had some periods of popularity, but it's really up there now. Why not capitalize on that?
What are we going to see in Louisiana? More of the same, Dave? It looks like Kentucky, and it'll be a coin flip at the end because it's basically the same contest. Maybe you don't like the policies one's presenting, but you don't like the cultural connections with the other?
Well, look, John Bel Edwards has to hang on to more than a third of white voters in Louisiana, and he's holding on for dear life right now. What we saw in the initial round of voting was that the white share of the electorate was higher than it was in 2015, in part because Trump visited the state. He's going to have to pump up the African-American turnout. That's hard for a conservative white Democrat to do. But we'll see. Right now, I think he's done probably just enough to localize the race, to personalize it against Eddie Rispone that he can still win.
Hey, Larry, it is amazing to me Democrats did so well in Virginia when their two top elected statewide officials, let's just say, were hamstrung by scandal. In fact, up here in Northern Virginia, Larry, you couldn't turn on a television without seeing the Justin Fairfax controversy being used, and it didn't work. What message does that send?
Well, it sent a very particular message, and I don't mean to always come back to Trump and to be Trump-centric, but it's another part of the Trump effect. He churns out controversies and scandals at a rate faster than any politician in American history. So we move on so quickly from event to event and controversy to controversy. That was February. That was like 4 years ago, Chuck.
I was thinking about your first great book that many of us read as students, Feeding Frenzy, and thinking, what the hell would that book look like today, Larry? Anyway,
it'd be twice as long, maybe 10 times.
It would be never ending, I think. Anyway, Larry Sabato, Dave Wasserman, two of the best. Thank you both. Much appreciated. Hello, YouTubers. If you're watching this, it means you've checked out our channel, so thank you. Now do me a favor, subscribe by clicking on that button down there. Click on any of the videos to watch the latest interviews and highlights from MTP Daily and MSNBC. You can get more Beat the Press content every morning in the First Read newsletter. If you're tired of content that you don't know anything about where it came from, you don't have to have that problem with us. NBC News, MSNBC, MTP, and the Meet the Press mindset right here for you on YouTube. Subscribe now.